Why was she still standing when everything else was burning? The frozen wind cut across the Ukrainian front like a blade of glass, howling through shattered steel and broken silence. Smoke hung heavy over the forward supply depot, thick, acrid and bitter, with the scent of burning fuel and blood. Somewhere beneath that gray sky, among the ruins of twisted metal, a wounded woman soldier dragged herself from the wreckage. Sergeant Brittney Morgan, 28. Mud-brown hair tied in what used to be a regulation ponytail, now loosened and streaked with ash. Her left arm hung uselessly at her side, crimson soaking through the tan fabric of her jacket where shrapnel had found her. The blood had stiffened into dark patches that cracked as she moved, but she didn't stop. Couldn't. Each step was a negotiation between agony and necessity. Behind her, a fuel truck burned like a pyre. The sky was orange now, thick with drifting snow and black smoke, the air stinging with cordite. Diesel fumes made her eyes water. The distant thunder of artillery rolled like the heartbeat of something cruel and patient. Supply girl thinks she's a real soldier now. The voice cut through the haze like a jagged saw. Staff Sergeant Collins, built like a wall, face glistening with cold sweat, laughter like gravel. His men stood around him, half of them filming with their phones, their breath visible in the frozen air. "Look at her, can barely lift her own weight," one of them muttered. "Guess she wants a medal before breakfast." Brittney didn't answer. She just gripped the handle of an 80-pound ammunition crate with her good hand and began to drag it through the snow toward the bunker. Her boots left dark, uneven prints, blood, oil, and ice. Every step made the wound in her shoulder scream, but pain was just another order she refused to obey. No one helped her. Laughter echoed off the concrete barriers, sharp and cruel. The kind that wasn't about humor, it was about distance. The kind soldiers used when they didn't know what else to do with fear. Then the radio broke through the noise with a burst of static. "Bravo 21 to base. This is urgent. We're down to our last magazines. 5 minutes without resupply and we lose the checkpoint entirely." The voice on the radio was calm, but brittle. A man trying to sound composed while death counted down in front of him. Brittney froze mid-step. Her eyes lifted toward the horizon, that gray line where smoke met snow, where flashes of orange marked the fight still happening. Somewhere out there, American soldiers were holding a checkpoint with almost no ammunition left. She looked down at the crate in her grip, then toward the mockers still smirking by the truck. Her jaw tightened. If they wouldn't help, she'd go alone. The depot stretched across 2 frozen acres, a maze of prefab buildings, sandbags, and steel barriers. Everything looked like it had been built to resist death for a few more seconds than normal. Now, it was chaos. The fuel depot burned hot enough to melt the snow 20 meters out. Black plumes rolled skyward, blending with the low clouds. Somewhere sirens were wailing. Somewhere else men were yelling orders. But Brittney heard none of it clearly. Her breath came in ragged bursts, clouding the air as she dragged the crate across the ice. The metal edges cut into her glove. Blood from her shoulder dripped down the side, freezing almost instantly. As she passed a line of soldiers loading an armored vehicle, they barely looked at her. Survival had a way of narrowing focus. Their world ended at the door of that vehicle. Hers reached farther, to a squad dying out in the snow. "Sergeant Morgan." The voice was sharp, commanding. Sergeant Rivera, older, 40, eyes lined by too many winters. He stood at the entrance of Bunker 7, leaning on one leg wrapped in field dressings that were already dark with blood. She changed direction, dragging the crate toward him. "Get in here now." The steel door clanged shut behind her, sealing the 3 of them, Rivera, young Private Williams, and her, inside a narrow concrete box lit by emergency lamps. The bunker smelled of sweat, antiseptic, and fear. Williams sat against the wall, fumbling with rifle magazines, his hands trembling too hard to seat the rounds properly. Rivera's voice cut through. Focus, Private. Fear keeps you alive. Panic gets you killed. Brittney said nothing. She lowered the crate with a dull thud and exhaled shakily, her breath fogging in the cold air. Then, without being told, she moved toward Rivera and crouched beside his wounded leg. Her fingers worked quickly, peeling back the soaked field dressing. She didn't flinch at the wound, jagged, deep, ugly. Her eyes scanned it with the focus of someone cataloging facts, not horrors. "You're lucky," she murmured. "It missed the artery." Rivera raised an eyebrow. "You sound sure." "Basic supply training includes casualty care," she said quietly. It was a practiced lie, the kind you tell because the truth would only raise more questions. Her hands moved with precision that didn't belong to a supply clerk. She applied pressure to exact points, controlling the bleeding with advanced combat technique. Rivera felt the pain recede within seconds. "Where'd you learn that?" he asked. She didn't look up. "We all learn what we need to survive, Sergeant." The room trembled as another shell hit somewhere close. Dust rained down from the ceiling. The lights flickered. Then the radio crackled again, sharper, closer this time. "Bravo 21 actual. Situation deteriorating. Enemy massing for final assault. Request immediate ammunition delivery. 15 minutes before we're overrun." The words hung in the air like a clock counting down. Williams looked up wide-eyed. "We can't make that run. The road's gone, the truck." "Destroyed," Rivera finished. "And Collins' squad already pulled back. They left us." Brittney's voice was calm, almost too calm. "They followed procedure. Combat personnel withdraw first under indirect fire." Rivera studied her. "You talk like an officer." She met his gaze, steady, unreadable. Just someone who reads the manual. He didn't believe her, not fully, but there were more pressing problems. "Even if you could move," Rivera said, "you're wounded. That crate's 80 pounds. You'll never make it 2 miles under fire." "Maybe not walking," she replied softly, "but there are other ways." Rivera frowned. "You planning to carry it yourself?" "If that's what it takes." Outside, the bombardment grew heavier. The depot shuddered with every impact. Fuel tanks ruptured. The air turned darker. Somewhere close, a building exploded, shaking the bunker so violently that Williams fell to the floor. "Jesus," he gasped. Brittney barely reacted. She was busy checking the stenciled labels on the ammunition crates, fingers tracing over serial numbers as if memorizing them. Her movements were exact, deliberate, the way someone double-checks their life's work. "Base, this is Morgan at Depot Charlie," she said into the radio. Her tone was precise, professional, devoid of hesitation. "I have sufficient 7.62 NATO ball and tracer mix for Bravo 21. Request status update." Rivera watched her, the way she used radio procedure clean, clipped, like muscle memory. The kind of communication you didn't learn from a textbook. "Base to Morgan," came the reply. "Bravo 21 still engaged. Estimated survival window 10 minutes. Acknowledge if delivery possible." Delivery possible. The rational thing would have been to say no, to save herself. Instead, Brittney replied, "Acknowledged, delivery in progress." Rivera's brow furrowed. "That's suicide." She didn't answer. She was already pulling gear together, rope, flare, medkit, sidearm. Her movements were automatic, as if rehearsed. Williams swallowed hard. "You really think one person can make that run?" Brittney looked up at him for the first time. "Those soldiers out there have mothers and fathers waiting on a call that doesn't end in silence. You think I can let them die because it's inconvenient?" Her voice cracked just slightly, enough to betray that this wasn't about orders or pride. It was about something older, something she'd been running from. The next shell hit closer. The lights went out for 3 long seconds. When they came back, she was already by the door, her rifle slung across her back, the crate secured to a makeshift sled. Rivera's voice softened. "What are you not telling me, Morgan?" She hesitated just long enough for truth to flicker behind her eyes. Then she said quietly, "Sometimes the mission, not written on paper, Sergeant. Sometimes it's carved into you." And she opened the door. Outside, the world was hell. Fire, smoke, shrapnel. The fuel depot burned like a wounded beast. Debris whistled through the air. The snow was no longer white but streaked with soot and blood. Every explosion lit her face in flashes, red, then gold, then shadow again. She pulled the sled behind her, boots sliding over ice, body jerking with every tug. The crate weighed more than her own frame, but she kept going. Above her, artillery thundered. Below, the snow hissed as embers fell into it like dying stars. Her breath rasped in rhythm with her heartbeat. One drag, one breath, one step. In the distance, she could see the faint line of the forest. Somewhere beyond it, Bravo 21. Somewhere beyond that, redemption. Because what Rivera didn't know, what nobody knew, was that Brittney Morgan wasn't a supply clerk by chance. 2 years ago, she'd worn a different patch, carried a different rifle. Her world had been one of silence and precision. A sniper instructor until the day she'd made the wrong call, until 3 students hadn't come home. The military buried her past under new paperwork and a quieter job. But guilt doesn't retire. It lingers, waiting for its second chance. And now, dragging an 80-pound crate through fire and ice, Brittney Morgan had found hers. The radio hissed in her ear, Rivera's voice, small and distant. "Morgan, come back, that's an order." But she was already gone into the smoke. The blast that followed was unlike any before. The fuel depot behind her erupted, sending a column of black fire high into the gray sky. The shockwave threw her to the ground. For a moment, everything went white: sound, light, pain, all merging into one. Then she pushed herself up, coughing, eyes stinging. Her ears rang. Her sled was overturned, the crate half buried in snow and debris. She crawled toward it, gritting her teeth against the agony in her shoulder. One arm, one mission. That was all she had left. She flipped the sled upright again, heaved the crate back on, and started moving. The depot behind her was collapsing in slow motion, metal groaning, flames devouring everything left. But Brittney didn't look back. She didn't have to. She'd already left her past burning there. And somewhere beyond that smoke, soldiers waited for ammunition that would decide who lived and who didn't. Somewhere beyond that smoke, redemption waited. And as she limped into the blizzard, rifle slung across her back, her silhouette fading into the white. No one watching from that bunker, yet knew they'd just seen the beginning of something they'd never forget. Because sometimes the most wounded soldier is the only one who still fights. Why hadn't she called back on the radio? Inside Bunker 7, silence had become heavier than the explosions outside. Every second stretched into eternity, marked only by the flicker of the emergency lights and the hiss of the failing ventilation system. Sergeant Rivera stared at the closed steel door, the one Brittney Morgan had just walked through 10 minutes earlier. It still vibrated faintly from the force of the last blast. Private Williams sat near the wall, hands locked around his helmet, eyes wide. He looked barely old enough to shave, let alone survive artillery. "Sir, do you think she made it out?" Rivera didn't answer immediately. His leg throbbed where shrapnel had torn through muscle, but the pain wasn't what unsettled him. It was her tone, her calm defiance before stepping into hell. "She's either dead," Rivera said finally, voice low and rough, "or she's doing exactly what she said she'd do. Delivering the ammunition." Another boom rolled across the landscape. Dust sifted down from the ceiling. The walls trembled. "Sir, we should move," Williams said. "The fuel dump's burning. If the fire reaches the ammunition storage—" "I know what happens," Rivera interrupted. His eyes moved toward the radio mounted on the wall, the one now crackling with static and half-words from distant units. The depot's network was breaking apart. Then a faint voice cut through. Bravo 21 actual, this is base. Copy your status. Over. Base low ammo. Perimeter breach imminent. The rest dissolved into white noise. Rivera leaned back, exhaling through his nose. He had seen brave men before, too many, but something about her, it wasn't bravery. It was something quieter, heavier. Like she wasn't fighting to live but to finish something that started long before this mission. He turned to Williams. Grab that med kit and radio. If she somehow makes it back, she's gonna need both. Williams nodded and started packing, his hands shaking. Sir, who is she really? Supply clerks don't talk like that. They don't move like that. Rivera didn't answer. He asked himself the same thing since the moment she walked in and patched his leg like a seasoned combat medic. Outside, the world had transformed. Snow mixed with ash. Fire painted the horizon. The ground trembled with the percussion of distant shellfire. Brittney moved through it like a ghost, low, deliberate, dragging the sled across frozen mud. Her breath came in short bursts, fogging the inside of her scarf. Her boots slipped on the ice, each movement sending fresh pain through her shoulder. But she didn't stop. The wind howled through the skeletal remains of the depot structures. Somewhere in that howling, she could hear voices, shouts, movement, the distant pop of small arms fire. She crouched low beside a burned-out truck, taking cover as another round of artillery screamed overhead and detonated a few hundred meters away. The blast waved through snow and debris over her, coating her like frost. For a moment she closed her eyes, counted the seconds between rounds, listened, calculated. Still at least 2 batteries firing from the North Ridge. Probably 122mm howitzers. Soviet-era, judging by the sound delay. Her mind worked the math automatically, range, timing, pattern, training she wasn't supposed to have. She exhaled and looked up toward the horizon. In the distance, faint orange flashes marked Bravo 21's last stand. 2 miles, maybe less. She adjusted the sled rope across her chest and started moving again. Back in the bunker, Rivera's radio buzzed to life, faint, fragmented. This is Morgan en route to Bravo 21, half a click east of Checkpoint Road. Visibility low, fire spread eastward. Rivera's heart skipped. She was alive. Morgan, this is Rivera. Copy your position. Do not engage unless necessary. Repeat. Static swallowed his words, then silence. Damn it, he muttered, slamming the radio. Williams looked up, eyes wide. She's still out there. She's out there, Rivera said quietly, and she's moving faster than I'd thought possible. He didn't add the rest aloud, that no one else could have made it that far under fire with that kind of injury. Unless they'd done it before. By the time Brittney reached the tree line, her vision was swimming. Her arm felt like it was on fire. The world blurred between smoke and snow, but she pushed through it, teeth gritted. She found partial cover under the remains of an old truck chassis, the metal cold and biting against her uniform. She dropped the sled, collapsing beside it for a second. Her radio hissed with another burst of static. Bravo 21 to any friendly station. We are nearly black on ammo. 2 casualties, holding north wall. She keyed her mic. Bravo 21, this is Morgan. Ammunition inbound from Depot Charlie. Hold position. There was a pause, then disbelief. Who is this? Supply unit. You're out of your mind, lady. That route's gone. Then I'll make a new one. She killed the transmission before they could argue. Her gloved fingers opened the top of the crate, checking the rounds. Clean. Dry. 7.62 NATO ball and tracer just as needed. She counted them by touch, then resealed it. Every motion made her arm throb, but she ignored it. Pain was noise, the mission was signal. A sudden sound snapped her head around movement in the dark. Figures, 2, maybe 3, emerging through the fog of the burning depot, their silhouettes sharp against the glow. Not friendlies. She froze, watched their posture, saw the way they moved, coordinated, deliberate, not scavengers, soldiers, Russian kit, Eastern camo. One raised a flashlight, sweeping the snow. It caught a glint metal on the sled. "Chayort," she whispered, ducking low. The light moved toward her, boots crunched closer. Brittney unholstered her sidearm with her good hand, thumbed the safety off, waited, listened to their breathing. 3 men, 20 meters out. She counted heartbeats. When the first one stepped into range, she moved. One shot center mass, then a pivot. Second shot 2 inches higher. The third turned to run. She dropped him before he took a step. 3 rounds, 3 hits. Silence returned. She exhaled through clenched teeth, steadying her shaking hand. Her shoulder screamed, but her aim hadn't wavered. "Not today," she muttered. She reloaded, moved. In Bunker 7, Rivera heard the distant echo of single gunshots cutting through the chaos. He froze, listened, counted. 3 shots, precise, even spacing. Not panic fire, not random. He looked at Williams. "That's her." The kid frowned. "Sir, how can you tell?" Rivera's face was grim. "Because that's the sound of someone who knows exactly what they're doing." The closer Brittney got to Bravo 21, the worse the terrain became. The snow was churned up by explosions, littered with shrapnel and the remains of burned-out vehicles. The air reeked of cordite and rot. The pain in her arm had become something distant now, not gone, just background noise. She reached that strange place where the body stops screaming because it realizes the mind's already decided to finish the job. Through the smoke ahead, she saw muzzle flashes, short bursts, return fire, the sharp rhythm of desperation. She hit the ground, crawling forward. "Bravo 21, this is Morgan," she whispered into her mic. "I'm visual on your position. I have ammunition. Be ready to receive." Static then. "You've gotta be kidding. You're coming through that." "I'm already here." She reached the edge of a shallow ditch, dragging the crate into cover. She could see them now, shadows of men moving behind sandbags, flashes of light from their rifles. The snow in front of them was scarred with impact marks. "Bravo 21, toss smoke northwest quadrant," she ordered. There was a pause, then a white plume rose. She smiled faintly. They were listening. She broke from cover and sprinted. Her boots pounded through the snow, the crate's rope burning against her glove as she dragged it behind her. Tracer fire cut through the air, red lines slicing past her. She ducked low, felt one pass so close it seared the air beside her head. 50 meters. 40. 30. A round struck the crate, sending splinters of wood flying, but the rounds inside held. She threw herself into the trench, landing hard, breath knocked from her lungs. The soldiers around her turned, eyes wide with shock. A woman, bleeding, filthy, hauling their lifeline through hell. "Holy shit," one of them started. "Ammo," she snapped, dragging the crate open. "Take what you need, move." They didn't hesitate after that. Hands reached, grabbed, passed boxes down the line. A young corporal blinked at her. "Who the hell are you?" She chambered around, propped herself against the wall of the trench. "Just supply." Then she started shooting. Back at the depot, Rivera's radio came alive with frantic voices. "Bravo 21 actual, we have ammunition. Repeat, ammo received. Enemy push repelled, holding position." Williams whooped, unable to contain it. She did it. Holy hell, she actually did it. Rivera didn't celebrate. He just exhaled, relief mixing with awe. "She's not supply," he murmured. "Not even close." In the trench, Brittney fired in measured bursts. Short, efficient. Every shot found its mark. The soldiers beside her looked over, stunned by her composure, her accuracy. She'd become something else again. Not the wounded clerk limping through snow, but the instructor she'd tried so hard to forget. Between volleys, one of the privates beside her shouted over the noise, "Ma'am, That's some shooting, you've been trained." She gave a faint, humorless smile. "Once." The words caught in her throat once, before everything went wrong. A rocket slammed into a nearby position, showering them with dirt and debris. She ducked, wincing as her shoulder flared. "Status," she yelled. "Still holding." Through the smoke, she could see movement, enemy troops regrouping in the tree line. She exhaled slowly, setting her rifle aside and reaching for her pack. Inside it, the smaller, specially marked case she'd taken from the depot. She opened it carefully. The contents gleamed under the dim light, a precision rifle assembled piece by piece, clean, calibrated, familiar. She stared at it for a long second before whispering to herself, "Guess I'm not done yet." And somewhere behind her, miles away in a bunker lit by dying lamps, Rivera stared at the radio with a dawning realization. This wasn't just a supply sergeant defying orders. This was something else entirely, something that didn't fit in the files or the chain of command. Someone the war had already taken once, and was now giving one last chance to make it right. She steadied the rifle, sighted through the scope toward the tree line where muzzle flashes blinked like fireflies. The world fell silent in her mind, no fire, no pain, no fear. Just distance, wind, target, breath. Breathe in. Exhale. Squeeze. The first shot cracked across the frozen air, clean, precise, final. And for the first time in years, Brittney Morgan didn't feel broken. She felt home. Why was a supply sergeant firing like a sniper with years of combat experience? In the fading light, the wind cut across the frozen valley like a knife. Smoke rolled low to the ground, turning the landscape into a gray sea of ghosts. From the trench, Brittney Morgan adjusted the scope on her precision rifle, each motion measured, silent, efficient. The rifle wasn't standard issue. The serial numbers had been removed. Its balance and trigger weight were exactly what her hands remembered from another life. She pressed her cheek to the stock. The cold bit into her skin. Through the lens, shapes moved at the edge of the tree line, enemy soldiers advancing cautiously, confident that Bravo 21 had nothing left to fight with. They were wrong. Her breathing slowed. The world narrowed to the crosshair. One squeeze, one enemy dropped. Another turned in confusion. A second squeeze, another fell. The sound of her shots echoed with mechanical precision. Every pause between rounds was identical, as if time itself obeyed her rhythm. The soldiers beside her glanced up from their rifles, realizing the source of the perfectly timed fire that was cutting down the enemy from impossible range. "Who the hell is she?" one whispered. "Doesn't matter," another muttered. "She's keeping us alive." Brittney didn't hear them. Her world had collapsed into focus, wind, drift, distance, movement, correction. It was muscle memory returning like an old ghost. She exhaled, centered the next target, and squeezed again. Back at Depot Charlie, Rivera listened to the rifle reports faintly bleeding through the static. Each crack came with surgical spacing. He turned to Williams. "Count them." The young private listened, head tilted. 3 shots, 10 seconds apart, then nothing for half a minute, then 3 more. Rivera nodded. "She's repositioning between volleys. That's counter-sniper technique." Williams frowned. "Sir, you're saying she's a trained sniper." "I'm saying," Rivera replied, "that whoever trained her didn't work in supply." He keyed the radio. "Forward command, this is Rivera at Depot Charlie. I need secure channel access, priority 1. Static, then a clipped voice. "Rivera, this is Lieutenant Hayes. Channel Alpha 7 is open. What's your situation?" Rivera leaned toward the mic. "Sir, I need a personnel check on Sergeant Brittney Morgan, supply section. There's something you need to see." "Already on it," Hayes replied. "Her files showing multiple classification layers. Stand by." The line went silent. Rivera stared at the glowing radio, the flicker of the emergency lights casting long shadows on the bunker wall. "Sir," Williams said quietly, "you think she's—" "I think," Rivera cut in, "we're dealing with someone who's been fighting longer than either of us understand." The firefight at Bravo 21 had shifted. The soldiers there, once seconds from being overrun, were now holding their ground. Each time enemy fire rose, it was answered by one precise shot from the northeast ridge. One shot, one kill. A lieutenant crouched beside Brittney in the trench, his uniform blackened by smoke. "You're hitting targets we can't even see," he said, voice hoarse. "Who the hell trained you?" Brittney's expression didn't change. "Doesn't matter." He looked at her arm, blood seeping through the fresh dressing. "You're wounded." "I noticed." "You can't keep firing like that." "Then find someone who can," she said evenly, loading another round. "Because if I stop, you're all dead in 10 minutes. The lieutenant didn't argue again. Hayes' voice returned on Rivera's radio. "Rivera, I've got preliminary results on Morgan's file. She's not what her current assignment says she is." Rivera straightened. "Go ahead." "Former lieutenant, 10th Mountain Division. Sniper instructor. Over 40 confirmed kills. Medically retired 2 years ago after a training accident. Classified review states fatal miscommunication during live fire. 3 students dead. She blamed herself and requested demotion to non-combat role." Williams swallowed hard. "So she's what, hiding?" "Maybe she was trying to disappear," Rivera said quietly. "But the war doesn't forget people like her." At Bravo 21, the enemy fire began to fade. The ground beyond the perimeter was littered with bodies half buried in snow. The soldiers around Brittney were staring now, not just at her aim, but at the way she moved between shots, sliding to new positions with instinctive grace, reloading without looking. She wasn't just fighting for them, she was exorcising something. The lieutenant crouched beside her again. "Whoever you are, you just saved every one of us." Brittney kept her scope aligned. "Don't thank me yet, they'll regroup. Base says extraction convoys inbound within 30 minutes. Then we hold 30 minutes. He looked at her profile, the calm in her eyes, the exhaustion behind it. "What's your name, Sergeant?" She didn't answer. She left her name behind with the burned depot. Inside the bunker, Rivera's radio erupted again. "Bravo 21 actual to base. Enemy sniper threat neutralized. Receiving precise covering fire from unknown friendly." Rivera smiled grimly. "Unknown friendly, that's her." Hayes came back on the secure line. "Rivera, she's engaging beyond standard rifle range. Our satellite feed confirms enemy casualties at 800 meters, all single shots. Whoever's on that ridge is the reason Bravo 21's still alive." Rivera adjusted his bandage. "Then you'd better get her out of there before the depot goes up. Extraction en route, but Morgan's position is too hot for direct pickup. She's on her own for at least 15 more minutes." 15 minutes under artillery fire might as well have been an eternity. The rifle cracked again. Brittney shifted positions, dragging her body through the frozen mud to a new firing point. She could feel blood soaking through her sleeve, warm against the cold air. She lined up her next shot, enemy RPG operator at 700 meters. The crosshair steadied over his chest. Her breath fogged the scope. One heartbeat, one breath, one squeeze. The round hit center mass. The launcher dropped from his hands. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to close her eyes. The noise of the battle receded into a hum, and in that silence she saw the faces of 3 soldiers she'd lost 2 years ago, young, trusting, waiting for her call. Her voice broke the silence. "You're not dying on my watch this time." Rivera and Williams were listening to the chaos over the open channels when the depot shook with another explosion, closer than before. A second later, the backup generator failed. The lights died. "Sir," Williams said, "the fire spreading toward the storage bunkers." Rivera tested his leg. Pain shot up his thigh. "We're out of time. Pack the radio, we're leaving." He limped toward the exit but paused. The faint echo of rifle shots still reached them through the wind. He looked back once at the radio. "Keep shooting, Sergeant," he murmured. "We're coming back for you." Outside, Brittney's world was collapsing into darkness and flame. The depot behind her glowed red, a collapsing inferno. She could feel the heat on the back of her neck even from this distance. She stayed prone, eyes fixed through the scope. The last of the enemy formation was breaking apart, retreating into the tree line. Each shot she fired pushed them farther. Her radio hissed. "Bravo 21 to all stations, enemy retreating. We are secure." Her hand dropped from the rifle. For the first time since morning, she exhaled without tension. Then her knees gave way. She knelt in the snow, the world spinning around her, her wounded arm heavy as stone. The adrenaline that had carried her this far drained out, leaving only pain. The lieutenant's voice reached her faintly through the noise. "Ma'am, medevac's 5 minutes out. Just hold on." She nodded once, but her eyes stayed on the ridge, the smoke, the distance she'd crossed. 2 years of guilt had brought her here, and now the only thing left was silence. She touched the rifle barrel with her good hand, fingers brushing over the steel as if saying goodbye. The extraction helicopters cut through the smoke, their rotors churning ash and snow into blinding swirls. Rivera and Williams, now outside the collapsing depot, watched as medevac birds passed overhead toward Bravo 21's position. Williams shielded his eyes. "You think she made it?" Rivera didn't answer immediately. He listened instead to the wind, the gunfire that had finally stopped and the quiet that followed. Finally, he said, "If anyone did, it'd be her." At the forward command post, Hayes stood over a live satellite feed, thermal imaging of the battlefield. "Bravo 21 secured," his aide reported. "Enemy withdrawing, friendly casualties minimal." "And Morgan?" Hayes asked. The aide shook his head. "No thermal signature. Either she's using concealment or she's already moved." Hayes leaned over the monitor. "Get me confirmation when they extract the wounded. I want eyes on her the second she's found." Brittney could hear the helicopters now, low, heavy, distant. She pressed her hand against her shoulder wound, feeling warmth leak between her fingers. Her body was giving out. She leaned her head back against the snow, watching the sky flicker with light from the burning depot. A faint smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. "Mission complete," she whispered. When the medevac arrived, the trench was littered with spent casings and the empty ammunition crate that had started it all. The soldiers pointed to the ridge, where a faint trail of blood led into the tree line. "She went that way," one said. The medic followed the trail until it disappeared into the woods. No body, no gear, just drag marks and a set of footprints leading farther into the dark. The pilot radioed back to base. "Command, this is Extraction Alpha. Negative visual on Sergeant Morgan. Area shows signs of movement, possible evasion." Back at the base, Rivera sat against the wall of the evacuation vehicle, leg bandaged, face pale but calm. The sound of the depot burning still echoed in his ears. Williams sat beside him, staring out the window. "Sir, if she's alive out there, she's hurt bad." Rivera nodded. "Then she's already thinking 2 steps ahead. People like her don't die easy." The radio crackled one final time before they reached the forward operating base. Hayes' voice came through. "Rivera, we've reviewed the satellite footage. Confirmed kill zone radius, 800 meters, precision fire only. She saved that unit single-handedly." Rivera looked out the window at the flames fading into the horizon. "Then she's not just alive," he said quietly. "She's writing her own orders now." In the darkness of the forest, the wind carried snow across her path. Brittney kept moving, slow, unsteady, but alive. Every step was pain, every breath was fire. But for the first time in 2 years, she felt light. Behind her, the war roared on. Ahead, only silence waited. She adjusted the strap of her rifle and kept walking. Sometimes survival isn't victory. Sometimes it's punishment. And sometimes it's the universe giving you one more chance to prove you still can. Why would someone vanish after saving an entire unit? The snow had turned red in places where the light from the burning depot touched it. Helicopters circled above like shadows of angels, their rotors scattering ash into the night. Somewhere out there, beyond the tree line, Brittney Morgan walked alone. Rivera sat inside the medical tent at Forward Base Alpha, his wounded leg elevated on a crate. The morphine dulled the pain but couldn't quiet the noise in his head. He kept replaying the last image he had of her, limping through fire with the ammunition crate, vanishing into the smoke without hesitation or fear. He'd seen soldiers perform miracles under fire before, but not like that, not with that kind of purpose. She hadn't been trying to survive, she'd been trying to atone. Across from him, Lieutenant Hayes stood over a rugged tablet, scanning satellite images. The flickering blue light painted the worry on his face. "Nothing?" Rivera asked. Hayes shook his head. "No heat signature, no radio transmission. She's off every grid." "Maybe she's just evading until pickup." Hayes didn't answer. He zoomed in on the map, tracing the direction of her last known position. Or maybe she doesn't want to be found. In the forest, the night was mercilessly quiet. Brittney moved through knee-deep snow, one hand pressed against her bleeding shoulder. Every breath came out as white mist. Her vision blurred at the edges, and she stumbled more than once, catching herself on trees blackened by smoke. Her radio had died an hour ago. The last thing she'd heard was Bravo 21 confirming they were safe. That was enough. Now she just wanted distance. Distance from the depot, from the mission, from the ghosts that had followed her for 2 years. A branch snapped behind her. Instinct flared. She dropped to one knee, raising her pistol in her good hand. Nothing, just the wind through the trees. She stayed low for another 30 seconds, scanning the dark. Old habits die slower than pain. Then she kept moving. Her left arm hung useless, and her blood had frozen into a crusted sleeve of ice. But somewhere deep inside, something kept whispering the same command over and over: keep moving. At base, Hayes paced. Rivera watched him with patient eyes that had seen this kind of worry before. "Sir," Rivera said, "you're not telling me everything." Hayes hesitated, then sighed. "You're right." He sat down across from Rivera, folding his arms on the table. "When I pulled her record, I expected a standard reclassification case, a soldier trying to escape combat stress. But the more I looked, the stranger it got. Half her file is redacted, entire years missing, and the classification level." "Above yours?" Rivera asked. Hayes nodded grimly. "Way above mine." Williams entered the tent carrying 2 steaming mugs. "Coffee," he said, handing one to Rivera, "or what passes for it here." He noticed the tension and looked between them. "You found her file." Rivera gestured for Hayes to continue. "Morgan served with a joint task force," Hayes said quietly. "One that officially doesn't exist. They specialized in long-range elimination operations, high-value targets, deep reconnaissance, things that never make it into reports. She wasn't just a sniper instructor. She was an operator." Williams blinked. "Like special forces." "Beyond that," Hayes replied. "Classified teams that answer only to the Pentagon's shadow cells. When she was retired, she didn't just lose a job, she was buried. They erased her." Rivera exhaled slowly. "Until today." Hayes nodded. "Until today." The forest thinned as dawn began to bleed into the sky. Brittney found a shallow ridge overlooking the valley. She collapsed there, half-conscious, pressing snow against her shoulder to slow the bleeding. The horizon glowed faintly orange from the burning depot miles away. She could still hear it in her mind, The cries, the gunfire, the sound of men she'd saved. For the first time since the accident 2 years ago, she'd fired her rifle not out of duty, but out of something deeper. Redemption had a cost. She looked at her hands, shaking, blood-stained and cracked. "Still here," she whispered. Her vision flickered, the world tilted. For a moment, she wasn't in Ukraine. She was back in that Afghan valley, lying beside 3 students who never made it home. "Ma'am," one of them had said before it happened, "you ever miss?" "Not when it matters," she told him. She'd been wrong. The radio call that day had been garbled, coordinates scrambled by bad intel. Her students had walked into friendly fire. She'd screamed into the headset, but the rounds had already been fired. She'd quit the next day, requested demotion, filed for transfer, but paperwork doesn't bury ghosts. Now, as the snow fell softly over her, Brittney Morgan realized she'd been chasing those voices ever since. "Sir," William's voice snapped Rivera back to the present. The young soldier pointed to a monitor showing a drone feed. "Movement, grid 7746 by 623, single thermal signature." Hayes leaned over the screen. "Zoom in." The image sharpened. A faint red glow against a backdrop of blue and black, someone moving slowly through the snow. "It's her," Rivera said. "Or what's left of her," Hayes replied. He grabbed the radio. "Alpha Team, this is command. I'm sending coordinates. Locate Sergeant Morgan. Priority 1, recovery, copy." "Copy command, moving now." The extraction team moved through the trees in formation, snow crunching beneath their boots. The forest was silent except for their breathing and the occasional static in their radios. They found her 20 minutes later, collapsed beside a fallen log. The snow around her was streaked red. Her rifle lay beside her, barrel buried in frost. "Contact," one of them shouted. "Hold fire," the team leader barked. He knelt beside her, checked for a pulse. Faint, but there. "Bravo Hotel, this is Alpha Team. We've got her. She's alive but critical. Request immediate medevac." "Copy Alpha, bird inbound." The team leader looked down at Brittney's face, pale, lips cracked, eyes barely open. "You did it, Sergeant," he said quietly. "You brought them home." Her eyes fluttered. She whispered something he could barely hear. "Not yet," she said. Back at the base, Rivera sat upright as the radio crackled. "Alpha Team to base. We have Sergeant Morgan, alive, condition serious, preparing for transport." Williams grinned. "She made it." Rivera let out a long breath. "I told you, people like her don't die easy." Hayes leaned toward the radio. "Alpha, secure her weapon and gear. Everything goes into sealed evidence cases. She's classified now." "Understood." He turned to Rivera. "Once she's stabilized, higher command wants her isolated until they arrive." Rivera frowned. "Isolated? She just saved an entire squad. You're treating her like a liability." Hayes didn't meet his eyes. "Orders, from people who don't explain themselves." Rivera stared at him for a long moment, then said quietly, "You ever think maybe that's why people like her break?" The medevac helicopter roared over the treetops, snow spiraling beneath its rotors. Inside, Brittney drifted in and out of consciousness. The medic pressed gauze against her shoulder, yelling over the noise. "Stay with me, Sergeant. You're gonna make it." Her eyes flicked open briefly. She could see the world through the open ramp, the gray sky, the distant plume of smoke from the depot, and the faint reflection of herself in the medic's visor. For a second, she didn't recognize the woman staring back. Then she let her head fall back, whispering to no one, "Don't let it happen again." At Forward Base Alpha, the medevac touched down in a storm of dust and snow. Hayes and Rivera were waiting beside the landing pad as the stretcher came down the ramp. Her face was pale, her uniform stiff with frozen blood, but her eyes were open, barely. She looked at Rivera as they passed, her lips curving into the faintest ghost of a smile. "You kept your promise," Rivera said softly. She didn't answer. The medics rushed her toward the medical tent. Hayes turned to Rivera. "She'll be stabilized within the hour. After that, medical isolation." Rivera's jaw tightened. "You can call it whatever you want, but we both know what it is. Debriefing. Interrogation." Hayes didn't argue. He just looked down at his tablet. "She crossed a line today. Not a bad one. Just one the Army doesn't like people crossing without permission." In the sterile white of the field hospital, Brittney lay under bright lights while a surgeon worked on her shoulder. Machines beeped in rhythm with her heartbeat. The doctor, a young captain with calm hands, glanced at her vitals and nodded. "She'll live." The nurse beside him frowned. "You're saying she carried ammunition across a combat zone with that wound?" The doctor smiled faintly. "Yeah, some people just refuse to die." Hours later, Rivera sat in the observation ward, leg wrapped in clean bandages, eyes heavy but awake. Williams joined him, carrying a tray of rations. "You should eat," Williams said. Rivera shook his head. "Not hungry." Williams hesitated. "Sir, what happens to her now?" Rivera looked toward the medical tent across the compound, where armed guards now stood at both entrances. "That depends on who gets to her first, the Army or her past." In that tent, Brittney stirred awake. The lights were softer now, the noise distant. Her arm was in a sling, her IV dripping steadily. A man in a dark suit sat beside her bed. He wasn't military. His badge said Defense Intelligence Agency. "Sergeant Morgan," he said calmly. "I'm Agent Johnson. I'd like to ask you a few questions about today's events." She turned her head slightly, eyes unfocused. "You mean the part where I saved your soldiers?" "Among others," Johnson said with a polite smile. "We'd also like to discuss how a supply sergeant managed to conduct precision sniper fire at 800 meters under artillery conditions." She gave a small, tired smile. "You read the manual." He chuckled softly. "You know, I've read a lot of manuals, Sergeant. None of them teach that." She didn't reply. Johnson leaned forward slightly. "You did something remarkable today, but remarkable people make powerful enemies. I'd like to help you make sure you stay alive long enough to see what comes next." Brittney's eyes met his, steady and unreadable. "Alive, overrated," she said quietly. "I just want the next generation to make fewer mistakes than I did." He studied her for a moment. "Then maybe there's a new kind of mission for you." She didn't answer. She just stared past him at the tent ceiling, where the shadows of rotor blades passed in slow, rhythmic circles. Outside, the sun began to rise, thin and pale, cutting through the smoke that still clung to the horizon. Rivera watched it from the hospital window, his reflection merging with the faint image of the departing helicopters. He thought about Brittney Morgan, how she'd walked through fire to deliver hope, and how the world would probably remember the mission, but not the person. He whispered to himself, "Sometimes the strongest ones are the ones trying hardest not to be noticed." Somewhere beyond the wire, the radio in the command post crackled to life again. "Command, this is Alpha, package secure, destination undisclosed facility." Rivera turned his head toward the sound. They were moving her. He closed his eyes, remembering her final words before disappearing into the storm. "Sometimes the mission, carved into you." He finally understood what she meant. Sometimes the hardest battles aren't fought for glory or medals. They're fought just to prove that broken doesn't mean finished. Why would they bring a wounded soldier to a place with no name? When Brittney woke again, the world smelled like antiseptic and metal. The lights were dim this time, softer than a field tent but colder somehow. She turned her head slowly, her vision clearing just enough to see the walls, concrete, unmarked, a single security camera in the corner. Her shoulder burned beneath the bandages. IV lines trailed from her arm to a monitor that beeped steadily beside the bed. No window, no clock, no insignia on the uniforms of the men who'd carried her here. Wherever she was, it wasn't an army hospital. A low hum filled the air, ventilation maybe, or the quiet presence of something electrical behind the walls. She'd been in rooms like this before, years ago, when the debriefing room still pretended to care about comfort. This one didn't bother. She sat up slowly, wincing as the pain spiked. The door opened. A man entered, clean-cut, wearing a gray suit, not the same agent who'd spoken to her earlier. He set a tablet down on the metal table beside the bed and folded his hands. "Good morning, Sergeant Morgan," he said evenly. "How's the shoulder?" She blinked at him. "Who are you?" "Someone with questions." He smiled without warmth. "You can call me Harper." She leaned back against the pillow. "And where am I, Harper?" He looked around the room as if considering his words. "Somewhere safe. Somewhere you can rest. You've been unconscious for nearly 24 hours. "Rest," she echoed, half laughing under her breath. "That what you call this place?" His expression didn't change. "You're alive. That's more than can be said for most of the people who were at that depot." She looked away. "Then maybe I did something right." He tapped the tablet, and the screen lit up satellite footage from the depot, her dragging the sled through snow, her firing position, the precision of each shot. "You did something extraordinary," Harper said, "and now the question is why?" In another part of the facility, Rivera waited outside a conference room. His leg was still in a brace, his uniform replaced with clean fatigues. He wasn't sure why he'd been brought here, only that two men in unmarked vehicles had picked him up from forward base Alpha and said, "Command wants a word." Williams had been left behind. That, more than anything, told Rivera this wasn't standard debrief protocol. He leaned against the wall, studying the black glass door in front of him. No nameplate, no insignia, just the faint echo of voices from inside. The door opened, and Hayes stepped out. He looked exhausted, not physically, but in that deep, hollow way officers looked when they'd seen too much classified truth. "Rivera," Hayes said quietly, "they want your statement about Morgan." Rivera pushed off the wall. "She alive?" Hayes nodded. "Barely. They've got her in medical sector 4. She's under evaluation." "Evaluation," Rivera frowned. "She's a hero." Hayes gave a humorless smile. "That's not the word they use here." In her room, Harper set the tablet aside. "You carried over 50 pounds of ammunition across a live fire zone with a bullet wound. You stabilized 2 soldiers on the field. You fired at least 22 confirmed rounds from a precision rifle that wasn't in your manifest. That's not a supply sergeant's skill set." "Maybe I'm just a fast learner," Brittney said. Harper's tone stayed calm, but his eyes were sharp. "You were part of Operation Glass Viper." Her body stiffened before she could hide it. "He saw it, so you remember." She looked at the floor, jaw tight. "That file's sealed." "Not anymore." He leaned forward slightly. "You were the instructor, the one they called Falcon. 3 students killed in a misfire, classified as operator error, but the internal report says otherwise." Brittney's voice dropped to a whisper. "Stop." Harper ignored her. "The misfire wasn't your fault, was it? The targeting data was wrong. Someone fed your team bad coordinates, and command buried it to protect the program." Her eyes met his, cold and tired. "You think dragging the past out helps me now?" He tilted his head. "I think it explains why a woman trying to disappear walked through artillery to save people she didn't even know." She turned her face away. "You don't get it. It wasn't redemption. It was instinct. I heard the call and I moved, that's all." "That's not all," Harper said softly. "You moved because it mattered again." In the conference room, Rivera sat under harsh light as a panel of officers watched him from across the table. A recorder blinked red in the center. "State your name and rank for the record," one of them said. "Sergeant David Rivera, 2nd Battalion, Logistics Command." The officer nodded. You were present during the depot assault. Yes, sir. And you witnessed Sergeant Morgan's actions firsthand. Rivera nodded. She saved that entire forward unit. If she hadn't moved when she did, Bravo 21 would have been wiped out. No question. One of the officers glanced at his notes. Did she communicate her intentions prior to leaving the depot? She didn't ask for permission, if that's what you're asking. Did you attempt to stop her? Rivera hesitated, then smiled faintly. Would you? No one spoke. The lead officer finally said, We appreciate your testimony, Sergeant. That will be all. As Rivera stood to leave, he paused. You're not planning to punish her, are you? The officer's expression didn't change. She's not being punished. She's being evaluated. Rivera nodded once slowly. You evaluate a piece of equipment, not a person. Then he left. Hours passed in silence before Harper returned to Brittney's room. He carried a file this time, thicker than the last. I spoke to command, he said. They're considering reinstating you. She looked up sharply. Reinstating me. In a different capacity, Harper continued. Advisory role, civilian oversight, training next-gen marksmen for counterinsurgency units. She laughed low and bitter. You're joking. It's an opportunity to teach again. I taught before, she said quietly. 3 of them died. You can't live in that moment forever. She stared at him for a long time. You don't get to tell me what I can live with. You weren't there. He didn't argue. You're right, but I've read enough after-action reports to know when someone stopped fighting because they lost faith in themselves. Her voice trembled when she replied, You think faith brings them back? No, he said, but it keeps you from joining them. Rivera sat alone in the mess hall later that night, a tray of untouched food in front of him. The facility was quiet except for the occasional hum of generators outside. He could feel the weight of the place pressing down, all the secrets, all the stories no one was allowed to tell. He thought about Brittney, about her silence, the look in her eyes when she'd stepped through fire without a word. That wasn't recklessness. It was clarity, the kind that only comes when you've already made peace with dying. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small metal tag, bent, scorched, but still legible. He'd found it near the depot ruins earlier that day. Morgan B.L. He turned it over in his hand, then closed his fist around it. They'll never understand you, he muttered, but I do. Brittney stood by the narrow mirror in her room, dressed now in clean fatigues. Her shoulder ached, but the bandage held. She studied her reflection for a long time, the scar on her cheek, the dark circles under her eyes, the faint tremor in her left hand. She didn't recognize the woman staring back, but she looked steady. The door opened again. Harper entered carrying a small case. Command-approved limited release, he said. You're being transferred back to field ops, temporarily. They want your expertise in one final review mission, threat assessment in the North Corridor. She turned surprised. You're serious? He nodded. You'll have support. Rivera's joining the transport team. Her brow furrowed. Rivera. He asked for it. For the first time since the depot, she felt something unfamiliar. Relief, maybe, or trust. When do we leave? She asked. Dawn. That night sleep didn't come. Brittney sat awake on the edge of the bed, staring at the faint light under the door. The facility was quiet now, too quiet. She thought about the offer, about training again, about walking back into a world that had already buried her once. She reached for her dog tags on the bedside table and held them tight in her fist. Maybe this was the universe's cruel way of saying you're not done yet. She closed her eyes and whispered to the darkness, If this is my second chance, I won't waste it. Rivera found her at sunrise, standing outside the hangar. Frost glittered on the tarmac. Helicopters idled nearby, their rotors slicing the dawn. She turned as he approached. Didn't think they'd let you out. He grinned faintly. They didn't, I walked. She shook her head, still stubborn. Still breathing, he replied. They stood in silence for a moment, the morning wind tugging at their jackets. Finally, Rivera said, "You know they're not just sending you to observe, right?" "I know. They'll test you, see if the old instincts still work." She nodded, "Then they'll find out." He looked at her, really looked, and saw something in her eyes he hadn't before. Not anger, not guilt, just calm. "Guess they picked the wrong person to bury," he said quietly. She smiled, a small, tired smile, but real. "Yeah, guess they did." As they boarded the helicopter, the first rays of sunlight broke over the horizon, turning the snow gold. The rotors lifted, and the base fell away beneath them. Brittney looked out the window, the landscape stretching wide and endless below. Somewhere out there were the echoes of everything she'd lost, and maybe, just maybe, something still worth fighting for. Rivera leaned closer so she could hear over the engine noise. "What's next for you, Morgan?" She watched the clouds for a long moment before answering. "I don't know," she said softly, "but this time I won't run from it." Sometimes redemption doesn't come with applause or medals. Sometimes it just means you can finally face the dawn without looking away. Why did the mission briefing feel like déjà vu? The helicopter blades thundered overhead as the world below blurred into a cold smear of white and gray. Brittney Morgan sat strapped into her seat, the vibration of the aircraft running through her bones. Across from her sat Rivera, his arm in a sling, face half-lit by the red interior lights. Between them, a steel case marked classified. Level 7 lay bolted to the deck. The pilot's voice crackled through the headset. "Approaching drop zone in 10. No heat signatures on scan." Rivera leaned forward. "No resistance expected." "Command says it's routine," the pilot replied. Brittney said nothing. The word routine never meant safe. It meant unimportant enough to ignore until it goes wrong. She stared out the window. The snowfields below looked eerily familiar. The shape of the hills, the faint ruins of old bunkers half buried under ice. It tugged at something buried deep in her memory. "This place," she murmured. Rivera looked up. "You've been here before." "Maybe," she said quietly, "or somewhere that felt just like it." The pilot's voice cut in again. "Drop in 60 seconds, temperature -15, wind speed 10 knots, good luck down there." The helicopter flared and descended. Snow exploded outward as they touched down near a line of rusted hangars. Brittney and Rivera stepped out into the biting wind, their boots sinking into fresh powder. The facility ahead looked abandoned, broken floodlights, sagging fences, a handful of vehicles half buried under snowdrifts. Rivera adjusted his rifle strap. "This is the North Corridor." "According to Harper, yeah," Brittney replied. "Used for weapons testing before the collapse, supposedly empty now." He snorted, "Supposedly." They made their way toward the hangar. Each step echoed in the still air. Inside, the space stretched wide and hollow, empty racks, shattered windows, oil stains frozen black into the concrete. Brittney swept her flashlight across the walls. She caught faded lettering near the far side, Glass Viper Training Division. Her blood ran cold. Rivera followed her beam. "That's your old unit." She nodded slowly. "Yeah, the one they said was decommissioned." Harper's voice came through her earpiece. "Sergeant Morgan, report status." She pressed her comm. "We're at the site, facilities real, still standing. You didn't mention the connection." "We needed unbiased observation," Harper said smoothly. "You're the only one familiar with the layout." Her jaw tightened. "You sent me back to the grave." "We sent you to verify what's left of it." "Same difference," she muttered, cutting the channel. Rivera gave her a questioning look. She met his eyes. "This place shouldn't exist anymore." They advanced deeper inside. The power was long dead, but faint light filtered through cracked skylights. Dust motes drifted like ash. Every hallway they entered carried echoes, their own footsteps layered over ghosts of drills long past. Brittney stopped beside a door labeled Range Control. The keypad was smashed, but she pushed the door open anyway. Inside, monitors sat dead and covered in frost. A single bullet hole pierced the glass of the main screen. She stepped closer, brushing her hand over the control desk. The paint was chipped where she remembered resting her elbow years ago when she'd called out coordinates for her students. For a heartbeat, she was there again, their laughter, the smell of gun oil, the nervous energy before their first exercise. Then the sound of screams, echoes she'd never escaped. She gripped the edge of the desk until her knuckles turned white. Rivera's voice broke the silence. "You don't have to go through this, you know." "Yes," she said quietly, "I do." In the operations room, they found something unexpected, a light still blinking faintly on a console. Power. Not much, but enough to keep a system running somewhere underground. Rivera frowned. That shouldn't be possible. Brittney crouched beside the terminal. The casing had been pried open recently, fresh scratches, no dust on the screws. "Someone been here," she said. Rivera raised his rifle. "Then we're not alone." A faint metallic clang echoed from the corridor. Both froze. Brittney raised a hand, signaling silence. Another sound followed, slow footsteps crunching on frost. She moved toward the source, each step deliberate, controlled. Rivera flanked right. They reached the corner just as a shadow moved past the doorway. Brittney spun, weapon raised. "Hands where I can see them." The figure stopped unarmed in a torn parka. A man, middle-aged, gaunt, with days of stubble on his face. He blinked against the light. "Don't shoot," he said, voice hoarse. "You're American." Brittney lowered the muzzle slightly but didn't relax. "Identify yourself." "My name's Dr. Levin. I worked here years ago. They told us the program was shut down. But a few months back, someone restarted it. They brought the old files, the algorithms, the AI range systems, everything." Rivera frowned. "For what?" "To replicate it," Levin said. "They're building new models, automated precision systems based on your data." Brittney stared at him. "My data?" He nodded. "Your name on every test log, every calibration file. You were the baseline Sergeant Morgan, the perfect shooter." She felt her stomach drop. "They're using me to build machines," she said quietly. "Not just machines," Levin whispered. "Weapons that don't miss. You were the template." Harper's voice crackled in again. "Morgan, report." She slammed her hand on the comm. "You lied to me." "What are you talking about?" "This wasn't a review mission. You sent me to clean up your mess. They're using my record, my kills, to make autonomous targeting systems." "That's classified," Harper replied calmly. "Not anymore." "Stand down, Sergeant. Extraction will retrieve you shortly." "Not until I've seen what's in the sublevel," she snapped, and cut the line again. They descended through a maintenance shaft to the lower levels. The air grew colder, heavier. Faint mechanical hums vibrated through the walls. Rivera's flashlight caught something ahead, a reinforced door, half open, leading into a chamber lined with metal racks and dormant machinery. And on the central table, a row of data cores, glowing faintly blue. Brittney approached, eyes narrowing. Each drive was labeled with a code, but one caught her attention: BV001 Falcon. Her old call sign. Rivera looked over her shoulder. "What do you want to do?" She stared at the drives. "Erase it." He nodded. "I'll cover you." She connected a cable from the console to the first drive. Lines of text scrolled across the dead monitors as she began purging the archives. Progress 3%, 8%, 12%. Then the overhead lights flickered. A voice echoed through hidden speakers, synthetic, female, calm. Unauthorized access detected. Intrusion protocol engaged. Rivera cursed. They've got automated defense still online. Panels slid open in the walls, small turrets emerging, their sensors glowing red. Down, Brittney yelled, diving behind a crate. Bullets tore through the air, sparking off metal. Rivera fired back, controlled bursts, keeping the turrets busy while Brittney worked. "Keep them busy," she shouted. "You think I'm not trying?" The purge counter ticked higher, 42%, 65%, 79%. A round ricocheted past, grazing her leg. She winced but stayed focused. Finally, 100%. The monitors went dark. The blue glow of the drives faded out one by one. The turrets fell silent. She exhaled, leaning back against the console. "It's done," she said softly. Rivera limped over, offering a hand to help her up. "You okay?" She nodded. "Yeah, just tired of cleaning up old ghosts." Above ground, Harper's voice was sharp now. "Morgan, respond immediately. What have you done?" She pressed the earpiece again. "I erased it, all of it." "Do you have any idea what you've compromised?" "Yeah," she said. "I compromised the people who thought they could turn guilt into a product." There was a long silence. Then Harper's tone changed, colder. "You've made powerful enemies today." "I've had worse," she said, and shut the channel for good. They made their way back to the surface as the snow began to fall again, heavy this time, like the sky itself wanted to bury the past. At the landing site, the helicopter waited, engines idling. The pilot looked nervous when he saw them emerge. "Command wants you back immediately," he said. Rivera helped Brittney climb aboard. "You think they'll court-martial you for that?" he asked. She looked out the window at the vanishing base. "Probably, or maybe they'll pretend none of this happened." He smirked. "Which do you prefer?" "Neither," she said. "I just want to stop them before someone else gets erased like me." As the helicopter lifted off, Rivera glanced down. The facility below was already vanishing under the falling snow. Brittney sat still, eyes distant. The hum of the engine became a lullaby. "Rivera," she said quietly. "Yeah. If they ask what happened down there, what will you tell them?" He thought for a moment. "That we found a mistake and fixed it." She smiled faintly. "Good answer." The helicopter banked toward the south, disappearing into the storm. In a windowless control room hundreds of miles away, Harper watched the feed go dark. A woman in a white lab coat stood beside him, arms crossed. "You knew she'd destroy it," the woman said. He didn't reply. "She was the key," the woman continued. "Now we'll have to start over." Harper turned toward the screen where Brittney's frozen image lingered, her face illuminated by blue light as she wiped her past from existence. He said quietly, "Sometimes you let the weapon think it's free, so you can see where it goes next." And somewhere above the clouds, Brittney Morgan stared at the horizon, a thin gold line cutting through endless gray. For the first time in years, she felt something that almost resembled peace. The ghosts were quieter now. But peace never lasts forever. Sometimes, the only way to end a war is to destroy the reason it ever began. Even if that reason carries your name. Why do the people who save others always end up hunted? The helicopter cut through gray skis toward the southern corridor, its hum steady, almost comforting. But Brittney Morgan knew comfort never lasted long, not in her world. Rivera sat across from her, fatigue etched into his face. Neither had spoken since takeoff. Below them, the snowfield stretched like an unbroken sea. Somewhere beneath that blanket of white lay everything they'd erased, and everything still watching them. The radio cracked to life. "Flight Delta 3, divert to Grid 22 by order of command. You are to land for debrief and medical reassessment." The pilot frowned. "That's not the route I was given." Brittney's instincts flared. "Don't follow that order." Ma'am. She leaned forward, voice sharp. They're pulling us out of comms range. Standard trick when they want someone to disappear. The pilot hesitated. Ma'am, that's a direct order. Break it, she said coldly, or you'll never see home again. The pilot met her eyes. Something in her tone cut deeper than rank. He switched channels without another word. Command, this is Delta 3, he said, unable to comply, weather systems ahead. Static swallowed the transmission. Brittney's stomach sank, jamming signal. Rivera gripped the side rail. They're already on us. Two black dots appeared in the distance. Helicopters, smaller, faster, closing in. Unmarked birds, the pilot muttered. No transponders. Brittney leaned toward the cockpit. Hold course south by southwest. Stay low, use the terrain. The pilot nodded, dropping altitude fast. The helicopter skimmed over frozen ridges, snow blasting off in waves behind them. Rivera braced himself, shouting over the engine noise. You think this is Harper? She shook her head. No, Harper's the voice. The hand behind him is older, the kind that builds wars just to balance budgets. The pursuing helicopters split formation. One banked left, the other climbed high, preparing to flank. Brace, the pilot shouted. A missile streaked from the high flanker, screaming past them before detonating ahead, a warning shot. Rivera cursed, that was close. Brittney grabbed the comm. If they wanted us dead, we'd be ash already. They're trying to force a landing. Rivera looked at her, then what? She loaded her sidearm, eyes cold. Then we don't let them take us alive. The pilot swung the bird toward a narrow canyon, barely clearing the ridgeline. Snow whirled around them in blinding spirals. Behind, the two unmarked helicopters followed shadows in pursuit. Brittney's voice was calm but firm. When I say jump, you jump. Rivera stared at her. We're 2,000 feet up. Better than being interrogated in a basement. The pilot yelled, I can't hold much longer, hydraulics are failing. Brittney looked at the altimeter, dropping fast. Now, she shouted. She shoved the door open, wind tearing at her. Without hesitation, she leapt. Rivera cursed and followed a second later. The wind howled like a living thing, snatching their words away. Brittney's parachute deployed, jerking her upward. Below, the helicopter spiraled down, a streak of flame against the gray sky. Rivera's chute opened moments later, drifting toward the tree line. The explosion came seconds after, a blinding bloom of fire lighting up the canyon. Brittney didn't look back. They landed hard in deep snow. Brittney rolled, gasping as pain flared in her shoulder. Rivera hit nearby, tumbling before regaining his footing. He stumbled toward her, breath fogging the air. Remind me never to take your travel advice again. She gave a weak laugh. You're welcome. They gathered what little gear had survived the jump. A rifle, a half-working comms unit, 2 flares. Rivera looked up at the dark ridge above them. We're miles from anywhere. Good, Brittney said. It'll buy us time. She adjusted the strap on her rifle and started walking. Where are we even going? He asked. South, she replied. There's a civilian checkpoint 30 clicks out. If we reach it, we can vanish. And then what? Then we make sure the world hears what they tried to bury. Hours later, the wind died down, leaving only the crunch of their boots and the faint hum of static from the damaged radio. Rivera finally spoke. You think anyone will believe us? Doesn't matter if they believe us, she said. Only matters that it's out there. Truth doesn't need permission. He smirked. You always talk like you're narrating a movie. She shot him a glance. You'd prefer silence. No, he said softly. Silence gets too loud. Night fell fast. They built a small fire under a rocky overhang, its light flickering across their faces. Brittney sat sharpening a knife against a flat stone, her expression distant. Rivera watched her for a while before asking, You ever think about what happens if we fail? She didn't look up every day. And I keep moving anyway. He smiled faintly. You really are impossible. Yeah, she said, voice softening. It's my best trait. They sat in silence for a long time, listening to the wind weave through the trees. The firelight caught in her eyes, making them look almost golden. Finally, she said quietly, you could walk away, say you never saw me. They'd let you live your life. He shook his head. Not my style. You dragged me into this fire, might as well walk through it together. For the first time in a long while, she felt something close to gratitude. Then let's make it count. By dawn, the fire had died. The wind carried new sounds now, engines, faint but closing. Brittney kicked snow over the embers. They found the crash site. Rivera grabbed his pack. We keep moving. They trekked across the ridge, keeping low. Every few minutes, Brittney checked the horizon through her rifle scope. She spotted a drone once, small, silent, scanning the terrain below. They're not sending troops, she muttered. They're mapping us. For what? Containment. By midday, the snow thinned, revealing the skeleton of an old village, half-collapsed houses, rusted vehicles frozen in place. Brittney motioned toward it. Shelter. They entered the ruins cautiously. Inside one of the houses, they found broken furniture and an old radio buried under debris. Brittney knelt, brushing frost from its dials. Think you can get it working? Rivera asked. She smirked. You forget what I used to do before they turned me into a ghost. After a few minutes of rewiring, static filled the room. Then a faint voice broke through. Repeat message confirmed. Operation Viper restoration underway. Phase 2 initiated. Target designations recovered. Rivera froze. Phase 2. Brittney's blood ran cold. They rebuilt it already. She turned the dial, another frequency, same voice. Initiate proxy cleanup. Subjects Morgan and Rivera confirmed hostile. Termination authorized. Rivera exhaled slowly. They're talking about us. Yeah, she said. Looks like I made the right kind of enemies. They destroyed the radio and moved out before the signal could triangulate. Every step after that felt heavier. By nightfall, snow began again, soft, relentless. They found shelter in a barn, its roof half collapsed. Brittney sat near the wall, staring at the fire Rivera had coaxed from scraps of wood. She spoke without looking at him. You ever wonder why people like us keep ending up here, fighting ghosts that never die? He poked the fire with a stick, because someone has to. She nodded. Yeah, but it always costs more than it should. He looked at her then, really looked. You lost people, I get that, but you didn't die with them. That means something. Her eyes shimmered in the firelight. It means I have to carry what they can't. They sat in silence again, the weight of the past pressing between them. Near midnight, Rivera stirred awake at the faint crunch of footsteps outside. Brittney was already moving, rifle in hand. 2 contacts, she whispered. No lights. They took position by the broken window. Figures moved outside, slow, careful, trained. Brittney raised her rifle. On my mark. But before she could fire, a voice called out softly through the snow. Don't shoot, we're not your enemy. Rivera frowned. You expecting company? Never, she said. The figures stepped closer, 3 of them, clad in dark winter gear. The lead one removed his hood, revealing a lined face and calm eyes. My name is Caldwell, he said. I used to work for Harper, until I saw what they were building. Brittney lowered her weapon slightly. You're the whistleblower. He nodded. The files you erased weren't the only copies. The mainframe's offshore under contract to private investors. You only delayed them. She exhaled, frustration mixing with exhaustion. So it's not over. Not even close, Caldwell said. But you exposed them. Enough people inside know now. You've started something they can't contain. Rivera stepped forward. Then help us finish it. Caldwell looked at him, then at Brittney. There's a safe house 2 days south. After that, a transport to neutral territory. If you want to bring the truth to light, you'll need to live long enough to do it. Brittney studied him for a moment, searching his face for deceit. She found none. 2 days, she said. We move at first light. When the strangers left, Brittney sat back against the wall, eyes heavy but awake. Rivera broke the silence. You trust them? No, she said, but I trust their fear. He nodded slowly. That's good enough for me. She looked toward the window, the world outside still white, still endless. You ever think the truth's worth all this? He thought for a long moment. It's not about truth, he said finally. It's about who gets to live with it. She smiled faintly. Guess that's our curse. As dawn crept through the cracks of the barn, Brittney closed her eyes briefly. The fire had died, but its smoke lingered, warm, human, real. When she opened them again, Rivera was already awake, checking his weapon. Time to move, she asked. He nodded. Yeah, before the world remembers we exist. She stood, tightening her gear, the faint light catching on the edge of her rifle. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like a ghost. She felt like a reckoning. Sometimes the truth doesn't set you free. Sometimes it just makes sure the chains are visible. Why do some people only find peace by walking back into the fire? The snow had stopped falling. The world was still, too still, the kind of silence that comes after something immense has broken. Brittney, Morgan, and Rivera moved through it like ghosts in daylight, their breath fogging the air. Behind them, 3 sets of tracks marked where Caldwell's team had split off, each going a different direction, decoys to confuse pursuit. Ahead, the last safe house waited, 2 days south, through ice valleys and fractured mountain trails. Brittney's shoulder throbbed with each step, but she didn't slow. Rivera kept pace beside her, glancing up at the horizon. If this place even exists, I'm buying the first round. She smirked faintly, assuming they let us drink where we're going. He smiled, then looked away. You think Harper's still out there? Oh, he's out there, she said quietly. People like him don't die, they just change uniforms. They reached the safe house at dusk on the second day. It was smaller than Brittney expected, an old radio outpost carved into a mountain's edge, its door half buried under snow. The wind howled through broken antennas above. Inside, the air was stale but dry. Rivera swept his flashlight across the room. You sure this is the place? Caldwell said we'd know, Brittney replied. And then she saw it, a symbol etched into the wall near the generator, faint but unmistakable. An old task force insignia. Hers. Yeah, she whispered, this is it. They moved deeper inside, finding 2 bunks, an operational generator, and a rusted terminal connected to an old satellite uplink. Rivera tapped it. Think it still works? Only one way to find out. The generator sputtered to life with a cough and a low hum. Lights flickered. The terminal screen glowed faintly green. Lines of code blinked into view, ancient, familiar. Brittney's chest tightened. Access Glass Viper Core files. Last sync, 11 HOURS ago. She stepped closer, reading. They uploaded again. Rivera frowned. From where? Offshore mainframe, just like Caldwell said. This terminal's syncing automatically. That means the data pipeline's still open. He looked at her. Can you shut it down? She hesitated. Maybe, but not remotely. I can only jam it temporarily. If I want to destroy it for good, I'll have to trigger a trace and follow it to the source. Rivera's tone darkened. That'll expose your location. She met his eyes. It always does. For the next hour, Brittney worked silently, fingers gliding over the worn keyboard, code streaming across the monitor. Rivera kept watch by the doorway, rifle ready, scanning the valley below for movement. Snow drifted through the cracks in the roof. Finally, the screen beeped. A map appeared, digital coordinates pinpointing a location in the Baltic Sea. Glass Viper mainframe, active. Security protocol, remote control access. Rivera stepped beside her. That's not just a server. No, she said. That's a floating data hub, probably military-backed. Autonomous defense systems, encrypted satellites, a fortress in the water. He gave a grim smile. So what's the plan? Steal a boat? She didn't answer immediately. No, she said finally, we leak it. Leak it. To everyone. She typed quickly, setting up a transmission protocol. Not to governments, not to command, to the world. Once it's out, no one can bury it again. Rivera stared at her. They'll trace you in seconds. She nodded. Then I'd better be fast. The screen flashed red. Trace duetiousitiide. Response team en route. Rivera cursed. They found us already. Doesn't matter, she said. I just need 5 more minutes. He moved to the door, loading a fresh magazine. Then you've got 6. Outside, engines echoed faintly through the wind, approaching fast. In the dim light, Brittney's hands moved faster. The uplink hummed, the progress bar crawling forward. Upload 34%, 47%, 68%. Gunfire erupted outside. Rivera ducked behind the doorway, returning controlled bursts. Snow exploded around the entrance as rounds tore through. Contacts 3 o'clock advancing from the ridge, he shouted. I hear you, Brittney yelled back, eyes locked on the screen. Upload 81%, 92%. Rivera leaned out, firing again. One target dropped. Another moved closer, flanking. 2 left. Upload complete. Brittney slammed her hand on the enter key. Transmission sent, global route SECURED. The screen went white. She exhaled shakily. It's done. Rivera turned, firing one last round before the valley fell silent again. You're sure? He asked. She nodded. The data's out. Every network on Earth will have a copy within minutes. He holstered his rifle, breathing hard. Then we just started a war. She looked at him, calm now. No, we ended one. The peace didn't last. A rumble shook the mountain rotors overhead, louder this time. Floodlights cut through the night. Rivera moved toward the door. Hello's inbound. Brittney grabbed a small device from the terminal, a black transmitter, blinking red. What is that? He asked. Failsafe, the last piece. She walked toward the generator. There's still one copy of the core left, this outpost's cache. If they capture it, they rebuild everything. He saw it in her eyes, what she was about to do. No, he said firmly, you're not pulling that trigger. She gave him a small, tired smile. You forget who trained you to think like that. He stepped forward, grabbing her arm. We can both make it out. She shook her head. If we both run, they win. One of us has to make sure this ends. Then I'll do it. You can't, she said gently. You still believe in orders. I stopped doing that a long time ago. He gritted his teeth. You don't get to decide that your life's worth less than mine. It's not about worth, she said softly. It's about closure. Outside, spotlights washed over the snow. Voices shouted through megaphones, commands, warnings. Rivera turned toward the noise. They'll breach any second. Brittney stepped closer, her hand gripping his shoulder. You've got to go. He shook his head. Not without you. Rivera, she said, her voice breaking slightly. I need someone out there who remembers the truth, someone who can tell them why this mattered. He met her eyes, steady, resolute. You think anyone going to believe a half-dead sergeant? They'll believe the man who stood next to her. A long silence, then he nodded once, jaw tight. You're a stubborn woman, Morgan. She smiled faintly. Takes one to know one. He hesitated, then pressed something into her hand, his dog tags. Just in case someone asks who you were. She looked down at them, then back up. They'll never know. Then I'll tell them anyway. The floodlights grew brighter, voices closer. Rivera moved to the exit, his rifle ready. You've got 30 seconds before they breach. Plenty, she said, powering up the failsafe. The device began to pulse, slow, rhythmic. A low hum filled the air as the generator systems overloaded. She looked up once more through the broken roof, where snowflakes drifted lazily against the light. Rivera paused at the doorway. Brittney. She met his gaze. Go. He turned and vanished into the storm. The first breach charge hit seconds later. The door buckled inward, a flash of light and sound tearing through the entryway. Brittney stood in the center of the room, the transmitter glowing bright now. She whispered to herself, no more ghosts. Then pressed the switch. The explosion was almost beautiful, white fire blooming through the snow, lighting up the valley like dawn. The shockwave rolled across the ridge, scattering snow and silence alike. Miles away, Rivera looked back, shielding his eyes from the blast. The mountain shuddered, then settled. For a moment, it seemed the world had stopped breathing. He stood there for a long time, staring at the rising smoke. Then he whispered, "Rest easy, Falcon." Days later. The footage was everywhere, every network, every screen. Files of the Glass Viper project decrypted and raw. Names, dates, coordinates. Proof of a system that turned soldiers into data points, guilt into algorithms. The world reacted in shock, then rage. Governments denied it. Corporations deflected. But the truth had already spread too far to contain. And among the names on the released file was one line, repeated across multiple entries. Primary source calibration, Morgan, Brittney L. In a small border town 3 weeks later, Rivera sat at a cafe overlooking a frozen river. His limp was worse now, but he didn't care. A local paper sat folded beside his coffee. The headline read, "Leaked military program shakes global defense alliance. Source unknown." He smiled faintly. Unknown, she'd have liked that. A voice interrupted his thoughts. "Mind if I sit?" He looked up. A woman, maybe late 20s, military haircut, sharp eyes. She carried a worn duffel and a folded piece of paper. "You're Rivera," she said. "You served with Sergeant Brittney Morgan." He hesitated, then nodded. "Who's asking?" She placed the paper on the table, an old photograph. A training group, smiling in desert sun. Brittney in the center, arms crossed, eyes fierce. "I was one of her recruits," the woman said. "Before everything went dark, I saw the footage. I saw what she did." Rivera's expression softened. "She'd have wanted you to keep going." The woman nodded. "She already made sure I would." She slid something across the table, a data chip. Rivera frowned. "What's this?" The last of her message. She sent it before the explosion. He stared at it, then pocketed it silently. The woman stood. She believed in something most of us forgot. He nodded. Yeah, she believed one person could still make a difference. She smiled faintly. Guess she was right. That night in a small rented room, Rivera inserted the chip into his laptop. The screen flickered, then a video opened. Brittney's face appeared, pale, tired, but calm. The background was the safe house, moments before the end. "If you're watching this," her voice said softly, "then I did what I had to. Maybe they'll call it treason. Maybe they'll call it courage. Doesn't matter. What matters is that someone remembers why we fight, not for orders, not for power, but for people." She paused, eyes lowering briefly. "I used to think guilt was my punishment. Now I know it was my reminder, a reminder to never forget the cost." Her gaze lifted again, steady, unflinching. "Tell them I wasn't trying to be a hero. Tell them I was trying to be human." The video ended. Rivera sat in silence for a long time, the faint hum of the laptop filling the room. Then quietly he whispered, "You were more than human, Britt. You were the proof we needed." Outside, dawn broke across the horizon, pale gold spilling over the snow. Somewhere out there, under that same sky, the echoes of her final act still rippled, not through guns or orders but through truth itself. And for the first time since the war began, the world started to listen. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. And sometimes, the ones who vanish leave behind something louder than any gunfire. A silence that changes everything.